So tonight I thought we'd continue our inquiry into conflict resolution as part of our dialogue on dialogues. And last time we met, we explored the receptive aspect more, the yin aspect more, the compassionate listening. And today I thought maybe we'd explore more the yang aspect, how we sound on our voice, on our breath, like effortlessly, the difference between last time we explored a little bit that distinction between going through the about heaven door and actually living in heaven and giving voice to what is felt and sensed as we continue to as it finds shape and color in our participation. So it's the way heaven is shaped in our inventing and discovering, and how we can give voice without leaving the experience to talk about it. Does that sound like a good starting ground?
Beautifully said.
Okay. So this process of as kind of a non-fragmentary attention. Otherwise, what happens is that I'm focused on, in a mechanical sense, thinking of communication as transporting something from my private world, right, and somehow making it locomote to public space. So that the idea is to see almost like a cell divide. So in the end, maybe two of us might have the same content, right, of experience. Right? You might walk away holding the same knowledge base that I did, or but if we don't want to go into an additive more, which would be like more pieces of information that I hold in a basket, like a basket of apples, and here's one more apple, or cells divide, and now we have, instead of my just holding these values, somehow those values now are sort of divided up, and now we have two people holding those values and going away. If what I want is much more structural, kind of more like multiplication, we were continuing that kind of metaphor of mathematics, then if we want to find that structural more, what I'm looking for really is something that's far more sexual, in the sense that the sperm and the egg meeting, right? That we don't wind up with an additive sense, an egg that now has like a sperm hanging out, through it like a tail, But what we have is this, whole new lifetime form that can't at all be anticipated from either part, right? And that's what really dialogue, I think, is pointing to, is something highly sexual. Something that we can't anticipate from the components that entered into this communion, right? But that emerges out of that as a fresh life form, so that meaning finds renewal, right? In something that is structurally more than we could have ever anticipated. Not like one more apple in the basket or more cell divisions of one belief system or value system, right? But of something that is now a convergence of meaning that has never lived in this form before. Like the convergence of rivers, like what takes shape in that kind of undulating, rippling, unfolding of a new coherence that can be felt as a shared reverie. Like there's two or more that are tasting, hearing, sensing together. Krishnamurti used to love to talk about that, of like two friends walking through a garden. That was like his favorite metaphor for dialogue, meaning that the live felt sense of being co-present, right? Not that he used those words, but what it was like, he and Vanda used to walk all the time through her gardens. And it's so exquisite, Here are these fields of really old growth olive groves, that her nephew used to play his cello, sitting on the roof to the olive trees each day. This beautiful Bach coming, wafting over the hillsides, and her son growing this, his French intensive biodynamic, gardens, and all of the fragrance of the herbs and the bietola and the grapes and all of that live, just like nourishing the senses and the sunlight and the soft breeze and that, just the hue of that golden Tuscan light, and what it was like to actually hear the sounds, of the animals and the crickets and to be tasting this full-bodied felt experience together. That was his favorite metaphor for dialogue, because it's such an equality of embodied mindfulness, right? That the somatic intelligence is really awakened, meaning it's not how you're following something in a linear context, but how you're tasting as a whole this cacophony of sounds and textures and scents and all of that wafting through the senses and rippling out and dropping down, and the meaning element, the words like stones thrown, in a pond, and the feeling sense rippling through the experience and turning to gravity, so that the whole new coherence of a felt sense of meaning can be shared together. That quality of awakened presence is what we're beginning to differentiate, how it is that we give voice to experience without leaving it. Because if I leave it to talk about it, which is generally what people do, right, then there's no way I can commune inside of a co-present experience. It's like if I leave my experience to talk about it, then there's no possibility of being intimate in that moment, because I've already deserted the experience. So how could you enter into my passion? How can we have this compassionate co-present experience when I've already fragmented myself from the passion that I'm living to talk about it?
Yeah, really funny image of a singer trying to sing about the song they're singing.
Yeah, right, exactly,
Like,
exactly.
you just there's a torque that happens in that moment.
Yeah,
So it's, and what I'm imagining is when we do talk about something, that's what I'm hearing you talk about, is like, rather than being in heaven, right, we're taking a tour of heaven, right?
yes,
And so, like a tour, we're, we have our tour guide, right? Who knows a bunch of facts, we have our cameras, and we don't look like anything of the
Right.
land or anything
Right.
of the town. It's so easy to spot a tourist.
right.
Because they're not interested in experiencing what they're touring. They're interested in being themselves the way they
Yes.
were, intact,
Yes,
to come out the other end unchanged,
yes,
but having gotten a bunch of pictures.
yes, exactly,
So they
stories
can talk
to tell.
about it to their...
The stories to tell, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
I think most people call that marriage.
Oh, okay, beautiful, beautiful.
And as you were, I just love the way that you opened all of that. Like, it's one of the beautiful things about language, which is just so incredible. A lot of people say that, language sometimes actually, it's hard to find words for the most fundamental experiences. And I think that's true, but there's this other part of language, right, that actually presents.
Yes,
Like you were talking about the orchard and the vegetables and the fruit and the atmosphere. You presenced all of that for me. I could smell it, I could see it. It completely manifested as the mood and the atmosphere of my own mind space.
yeah,
And I found myself at a different quality of time,
yes.
in which at a certain moment I actually popped out and I was like, whoa, I was totally there.
Yeah,
So there's a real reality
yes,
that we can presence.
yes.
However,
That is not bound
yes,
in the sense by time or by location. And that is this incredible capacity that we have both for time binding and for space binding, right?
the thing you're saying about location, one of the things I've noticed lately, I never really thought about this, is that usually when I have a chronic contraction somewhere in my body, or something really hurts, or I'm suffering somewhere, it seems like suffering is always tied with location, right? The more something hurts, the more I'm focused there, right? The more rigid I am, right? The more suffering, the more the sense of location and its fixedness is bound there.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you say is to unbound the sense of location, right?
Yeah, in fact, when
Am I
we
getting it?
when we do this intrinsic sensing work, one of the things that I'll conduct people to explore is what happens when, in other words, instead of a sensation having a location, that sensation, which might start out with a great intensity, becomes the universe, meaning that there's nothing above it, there's nothing below it. There is just this movement that then opens up a universe within itself, right? So you have movements within movements within movements, and that those movements can be as spacious as the space between the stars, and suddenly you realize that the sense of pain comes from that the pressurizing of something being located, and as soon as there's nothing above or below, right, there's just that becomes the universe. There's so much space that there's no pressure, and so one no longer experiences pain. You just experience movements within movements, and it can keep unraveling, and that's how, I found myself through the pain that I started with, that began to invent the somatic learning work, and exactly how you describe that,
Mm.
and it's so beautifully described, is leaving that sense of location, because those coordinates in three-dimensional space, right, isn't something we invent as we're discovering it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not like, it's not given an objective reality. It's part of how, like, what we sense from. And as we sense more implicate, it's like we go through a portal in which we go like through a membrane, if it was like in string theory would describe it that way, into a greater dimensional awareness. Now we become more implicate in our sensing, right? So we can begin to, that location basically is unravels itself, right, into, is like we extend beyond the limitations that from here, this looks out there, right, and suddenly I can begin to sense in which that becomes a universe, right? So the more implicate we go in our somatic intelligence, meaning, what I mean by somatic, which is so often roughly translated in English as body, right? But the word, and the reason why we refer back to the Greek etymological roots of the word, is that soma didn't mean body. Soma meant the intelligence of life, self-sensing, right? Is that ability to be awake in the unfolding of life, right, from the inside out,